we decided that there's already plenty of other companies working in depression and PTSD and anxiety, and that's terrific. And we're certainly, out here rooting on the sidelines for those companies to be successful as well. But we think that the value that TRYP Therapeutics is going to bring is all going to be around taking these chemistries, which are known to be active, which are known to be safe and well tolerated, and point them towards these other patient populations that have high unmet medical need.
Greg McKee joins me now, CEO of TRYP Therapeutics, trading on the CSE under the symbol TRYP, and in the United States under the symbol TRYPF. Greg, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on today.
It's awesome to have you on, Greg. Let's talk about your business. What is the business of TRYP Therapeutics?
Yeah, so TRYP Therapeutics is a psychedelic drug development company. So we're working on commercializing psilocybin for a number of different unique therapeutic areas in chronic pain and eating disorders.
That is fantastic. There's been a real explosion in companies using hallucinogenic, psychedelics, whatever you want to call them, for just a whole rash of things. And so that's interesting. Are you finding that there is a competitive, like a lot of competition in the landscape for you, or at this point is your niche area sufficiently sort of new that there's not?
Yeah, so you're completely right. There's a lot of activity going on in the psychedelic drug development space right now. It's a very exciting field, and we're really happy to be, part of that. But we've also, after a completely different, niche of these different, patient populations, specifically in the chronic pain and eating disorders area. So it's a lot less crowded in the areas that we're working in. We decided that there's already plenty of other companies working in depression and PTSD and anxiety, and that's terrific. And we're certainly, out here rooting on the sidelines for those companies to be successful as well. But we think that the value that TRYP Therapeutics is going to bring is all going to be around taking these chemistries, which are known to be active, which are known to be safe and well tolerated, and point them towards these other patient populations that have high unmet medical need.
And so is the psilocybin-based product that you've isolated, is it essentially the molecular form of the psychoactive compound?
Right. So there's two things that we're doing, right? So one thing to differentiate us is to go after these novel indications, as I already mentioned. The second thing that we're focused on, and we know is important for the industry, is to frankly come up with a secret sauce, right? Come up with something that's really, different, and not just from an IP perspective, by the way, right? We know that there, frankly, hasn't been a lot of traditional pharmaceutical development of these chemistries, although there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, there's a lot of recreational use, of course, over the decades. And there's even academic studies that have been done. But we know that kind of the traditional pharmacology, PK/PD, is it called, and other early work has not really been rounded out like it typically would be. So, and we know that one of the major problems right now is that if you take an oral pill, that there's a lot of inconsistency that patients have. Some never enter the psychedelic state. Certain patients will enter the psychedelic state and have, they'll have a journey that's 8 to 10 hours long, which is really problematic from a bunch of different perspectives, including in terms of having psychotherapists in the room for that long period of time, and also in terms of commercializing it. So what we think that the issue to solve is coming up with a different formulation and a different route of administration of something that's akin to psilocybin. And you sort of hit the nail on the head there, that psilocybin is the prodrug, ingredient that puts you in the psychedelic state. So we think in that mix, without being too coy, is an interesting formulation coupled with an interesting, pretty standard route of administration that will create a much more consistent experience for patients, and also one with potentially a better safety profile. So that's what we're working on, and what we are calling TRYP 8803, which is our proprietary formulation, our proprietary route of administration of this psilocybin-based chemistry.
Sure, you bring up an interesting point when you talk about the requirement for a to be present at any point during a patient's exposure or therapy, if you will. And I'm curious as to, there's some companies are actually saying that they've got 2 people in the room. And I'm thinking, well, that's got to be an awful difficult way to sort of amp up scale revenue if you've got to have two licensed professionals in a room for one patient who's paying a one-time fee, or a portion of a fee as part of a sort of subscription. How do you sort of mitigate those requirements? I mean, you're talking about mitigating it through a specific compound.
Right. Yeah. So the interesting thing about psychedelic drug development is that there are at least three pretty significant components, right? So one being the drug itself, the second being the psychotherapy. And we know that you need to couple the psychotherapy along with the drug to get a durable effect. And then the third component is the setting, right? And where this actually takes place. And there's certain companies that are focused on that. We're highly focused on the drug and the psychotherapy. We think that psychotherapy protocol will include a pre-treatment session, right, to essentially get patients ready for the journey they're about ready to make. It can be pretty daunting thinking about going into the psychedelic state for their first time. So getting patients prepped for that is really an important kind of first starting point. And then, as you mentioned, then there will be on our current protocol 2 monitors in the session at the same time, with the patient. That's done for safety reasons, among other things. And yes, it's a little bit cumbersome. Those have to be licensed individuals. Are also going to be typically on the psychotherapy protocol that we're creating for that particular therapeutic indication. So we've actually customized that for certain treatment modalities, right? So in our fibromyalgia study, for example, there's one modality. For our binge eating disorder trial, it's slightly different. And in the phantom limb pain, it's yet again slightly augmented to suit those particular patients. But there will be 2 monitors in the session, and then there are also what are called post-treatment integration sessions, and there'll be a number of those potentially to help the patient kind of solidify the experience effect. So there definitely are 3 critical pieces. Psychotherapy is an important part along with the drug, and the setting's key as well. And yes, that makes it a little more complex from a commercialization perspective. But we think there's a lot of good examples, such as infusion centers for oncology products, dialysis centers, and sleep clinics, for example, where you've got a similar setup, where you've got unique settings, where you've got other individuals involved that are helping the patient along those experiences, reimbursed appropriately from payers and providers, and of course approved by the FDA. So we think that business model is probably well proven in other areas of the healthcare system, and will also work here with psychedelic drug development and in this particular area. We know at the end of the day that if you're actually able to solve the problem, and these are big problems in fibromyalgia and phantom limb pain and complex regional pain syndrome, for example, where there's really not a whole lot of other treatments, we know that if we can solve those problems, that likely we'll get approval, with the right data, and we'll get pay for these treatment sessions.
Sure. So what does the timeline look like until you achieve something approaching commercial profitability?
Yeah, well, so commercial profitability is a very high bar, and it is very far, it's pretty far down the path, for us. But there's a lot of other intermediate milestones that we'll achieve, including obviously getting approval, as well as interim data along the way. So where we are right now is that we've got 3 phase 2A clinical studies with a surrogate oral material that we're psilocybin in these unique therapeutic areas. We're about ready to start dosing patients on those 3 trials here in the next few months, and then we'll have interim data from those studies, which will be a really important proof of concept for us. And then second of all, we're working on our proprietary formulation and our proprietary route of administration, and we'll have data that's supporting a very significant conversion of a provisional patent, and we'll also be in a position where we can talk specifically about what that formulation is, what the route of administration, the IP landscape looks like. So those are some really important steps. And then in addition to that, we've got a clinical study with our material that will be underway shortly at the University of Wisconsin with Paul Hudson, and we'll have data from that demonstrate what we hope will be equivalent exposure between our material, our formulation, our route of administration, and the standard oral psilocybin. We think that for us will be quite a golden ticket in terms of data and be really, really telling. So we've got a number of studies that are taking place right now, data this year that we think will be significant proof of concept for us. And that will be sort of a really important step in terms of value creation for investors, well before we get to kind of the higher and longer term milestones of getting to approval, getting for sale, getting to profitability.
Right. Does the regulatory landscape pace of evolution match your sort of pace of development?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Thinking about sort of the decriminalization of psychedelics versus sort of what we're doing, right? So that's certainly one path, and the sooner that we can work to help support decriminalization of psychedelics, I think will be useful. Right now, we've got to, of course, work through the FDA, which has its own kind of process, and that's all data driven. So frankly, the rate of our development is very much in sync with that process, and it's all about us generating that data to present to the FDA. So the sooner we can get to well-controlled studies with our material, the sooner we can present that to the FDA and hopefully get approval for our product. In the meantime, we've got to deal with the Drug Enforcement Agency, or the DEA, and that's frankly just because these are Schedule I drugs, as everyone knows. These are logistical challenges that we've got to navigate through, which are frankly not going to be changed in the short run. And even if these drugs are descheduled or isn't taken off Schedule I listing, certainly that will help increase the pace of R&D and eliminate some of this the hassle that we've got to work that we go through with the DEA. But frankly, they're somewhat decoupled, right? So that the whole pathway to decriminalize psilocybin and let it be legal to use that for recreational use is very different than our particular kind of traditional ethical pharmaceutical drug development pathway going through the FDA and working within the DEA's guidelines of how you handle Schedule I drugs right now. But we're certainly supportive of criminalization. We're certainly supportive of other companies that are doing work in other areas of psychedelic drug research, but our focus is on a traditional ethical pharmaceutical pathway to approval, like other standard chemistries in the healthcare industry.
Right. All right, Greg. Well, that's interesting. We're going to follow along with interest and have you back soon. Really appreciate your time today.
Great. Well, terrific to be here. Thanks so much, and look forward to coming back in the future to report on our progress.
You bet. For now.